Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. A warm welcome from the UN Environment Program, UN Development Program, the GEF Secretariat to the Convention on Biological Diversity for this webinar focusing on the issue of policy coherence and policy alignment. Before I begin, I just want to confirm that those colleagues who are online can hear and see the screen properly. Would any one of you confirm? Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks a lot for confirming that. My name is Balakrishna Pisupati. I head the Environment Policy Unit at the UN Environment Program based in Nairobi. Welcome to this 9th in a series of webinars under the Global Environment Facilities Early Action Support Project, where many of you are aware that countries are now beginning to update their national biodiversity strategies and action plans and set the national targets, aligning them with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that was adopted during the 15th meeting of Conference of Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity. With support from the Global Environment Facility, UNDP, and the UN Environment Program are collectively assisting a number of countries to help them prepare for updating the national biodiversity strategies and action plans and set the national targets. In doing so, both organizations are working on developing a number of knowledge products, tools, and guidance documents so that countries can prepare themselves well to update the national biodiversity strategies and action plans and the national targets. And one of the decisions that came out of the Montreal, the 15th meeting of Conference of Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity is to request countries, as they are preparing to update their NBSAPs, the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, to address the issue of aligning policies and also to use approaches related to policy coherence during the updating process and setting the national targets. So the focus of this particular webinar is exactly on that, is to hear from a number of experts who've been working on these areas of policy alignment and coherence that belong to both UNDP and UNEP. But interestingly, we also have a number of country case studies that also will be presented. And to an extent, that is going to be the most interesting part of this webinar, in my opinion, because there is nothing better than having a peer-to-peer learning in this process. Before we begin the webinar and start the presentations, I'd like to quickly take you through a few housekeeping announcements. I'm sure we're all experts in using the various meeting platforms, including Zoom. But certainly just a very quick recap that if you have any technical problem, you please send a private message to my colleague, Stantony Kamau on Zoom, or you can also send an email to the address that is provided on the screen. The webinar is also available and will be available as a recording on the web page, where the site address is provided on the screen. The next slide. We'll have muted the microphones for all of you to facilitate uninterrupted presentations. And of course, from what you see on the screen, you may be a little overwhelmed with the number of presentations, but I'm sure that most of these presentations will be short and crisp, and we will have enough time to have interactive question and answers and discussions once we complete all the presentations. You can use the chat function on the Zoom link where you have already joined, or you can also raise your hand virtually so that we'll be able to provide you the space and time to ask your question and provide your comment. And as I mentioned, the focus of this webinar is on policy alignment and policy coherence. And many of you probably have already started working on these issues. And to give you a 1-minute background before we start and get into the details of the agenda and the presentations, many of you may be aware that the issue of policy coherence started receiving much bigger attention thanks to the Sustainable Development Goal number 17, where the goal had a target 14, under which there is an indicator, the first indicator of the target number 14, that requires countries to actually use policy coherence as an enabler for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. UNEP serves as a custodian agency for this particular indicator. In other words, UNEP is mandated to help countries implement a number of activities, use the indicator more effectively. But over the period of time, between 2015 and now, the issue of policy coherence is started finding space in a number of different multilateral processes. And one of them is the Convention on Biological Diversity and the decisions of the 15th meeting of the Conference of Parties to the Convention, where countries are required or requested to use policy coherence as an important component as and when they are updating the national biodiversity strategies and action plans and also setting the national targets. But of course, when you talk of coherence, you need to align the policies first and then look at coherence. And I'm sure we will hear some very specific examples, experiences from those experts, those colleagues who will be making their presentations. But certainly we will have enough time to clarify any questions or doubts you may have in operationalizing some of the elements related to ensuring policy alignment and policy coherence. And from UNEP, we have just finalized a guidance document to help countries deal with the issue of policy coherence in the context of updating their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. The agenda for today is fairly straightforward. We will have an overview of the target-based support for alignment and coherence with the Global Biodiversity Framework. And that will be presented by my colleague, Jemison Erwin, who is the manager at UNDP, focusing on nature for development. It's a pre-recorded presentation. We'll have 3 case studies immediately following that particular presentation from Colombia, Ecuador, and Uzbekistan, all pre-recorded. We will have 1 presentation from my colleague from UNDP, Scott Atkinson, the technical specialist, who will focus on the issue of spatial data and alignment. Then we will have a presentation from a colleague from UNEP, who actually worked with us in developing the policies or the guidance for policy coherence or ensuring policy coherence. And we also hopefully will have a colleague from Vanuatu who will join us to give his inputs from a country perspective before we close the presentations and open the floor for any question and answers. Again, as I mentioned, if you have any comments or questions, please do use the chat function of the Zoom meeting link where you are connected to input your questions. But at the end of all the presentations, we'll open the floor for questions in case if you want to raise your hand and speak up. I'll be assisted by colleagues from both UNDP and UNEP, Alexis from UNDP and Anthony from UNEP during this particular process. And I thank them very much for the preparatory work that has gone into organizing this webinar. So now, Alexis, if you're ready, we already can start going to the presentation by Jamie to begin with. Over to you, Alexis. If you can share the presentation. Alexis, I think we're not able to hear the sound. Is it only me?
So aren't you able to hear the presentation?
No, the presentation comes up, but not without sound.
With no sound. Oh, okay.
I mean, any one of the colleagues online can confirm that it's not just me having that problem.
Just give me a
Yeah,
moment.
there is no sound. Yeah.
Sorry about this. Let me try to figure this out.
It does happen.
Let me try again.
I'm going to talk about policy
Go
coherence,
ahead, it's fine.
policy alignment with the global biodiversity framework. Let's start with a definition. And here I'll be using the definition created by the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel of the Global Environment Facility. They define policy coherence as an approach to integrating different dimensions of sustainable development throughout domestic and international policymaking by doing three things. The first is looking at synergies and benefits across their entire policy landscape, including economic, social, and environmental policies. The second is balancing their domestic policy, their national policy, with internationally recognized sustainable development goals and other global targets. And third, by looking at the long-term impacts of multiple policies as these play out with each other over time. Policy coherence has a number of terms that come with it, or a number of different aspects. The first is coherence of national policies with international agendas. So, for example, the Global Biodiversity Framework or the Sustainable Development Goals. The second is coherence across international agendas. It's possible and oftentimes very likely that you might have one country determine their contribution to an international agenda for climate and for biodiversity, for example, in very different ways that aren't really fully aligned. The third area is coherence across national agendas. The fourth is coherence across different actors within the country. And then finally, coherence across different agencies and sources of finance. For the purposes of the Early Action Support Project, policy alignment is a subset of the broader issue of policy coherence. Here we're defining policy alignment as the degree to which national policies align with the global biodiversity framework. And we help governments identify where the policy gaps and potential areas of misalignment might occur by providing self-assessment tools and checklists. Why does this matter? Policy alignment helps governments coordinate actions between multiple sectors and actors for better impact. They can avoid actions that undermine national targets, goals, and objectives by really thinking through clearly, are all of these different policies aligned? They can optimize the use of resources and deliver results on multiple national priorities in the most efficient way possible. To that end, UNDP has created a series of so-called mini manuals. These are 8 to 10 pages each, with a set of structured questions for each of the Global Biodiversity Framework targets. The purpose of these mini manuals is to provide countries with a structured template and process to systematically assess the national policy alignment with the Global Biodiversity Framework and to identify pathways for policy alignment with the goal of updating the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan in the coming year. The policy manuals, these policy alignment mini manuals, have a couple of components. They deconstruct each target into elements. They provide specific policy alignment questions for each element. They provide an action plan template, and they include key definitions and additional resources from the Convention of Biological Diversity. I just want to share 2 examples of how we deconstruct each target. We look at actions, qualifiers, and outcomes. So for target 1, the action is ensure that all areas are under integrated biodiversity inclusive spatial planning. The qualifier here is participatory and respecting the rights of indigenous peoples. And the outcome is to bring the loss of areas of high biodiversity importance to close to 0 by 2030. Similarly, for target 2, the action here is to ensure that by 2030, at least 30% of areas of marine and coastal systems are under restoration. The qualifier here is effective, and the outcomes are in order to enhance biodiversity and ecosystem functions and services, ecological integrity, and connectivity. We found that pulling these targets into their different components really helps us hone in on the key questions. I won't go through all of these. You can download the mini manuals yourself, but just to say that each of the actions and the qualifiers and the outcomes has a set of specific questions that are fairly basic. For example, What policies and or policy instruments do you have that are relevant to this target? And how comprehensive are they, considering a variety of different elements? We also look at then the gaps in the recommendations. So considering, here's some examples from target 1, considering the responses to the previous questions, what are the potential policy gaps and or inconsistencies? What are the proposed recommendations for new policies? And what are the top recommendations across all of the different sub-questions for this target? And as a result, the government can look at, the team can look at all of the different recommendations and come up with a prioritized action plan for policy alignment that prioritizes recommendations and actions for aligning policies across all targets and identifying a sort of pathway analysis towards sectoral alignment. And this means prioritize thematic analysis of sectors, pathways for policy alignment and transformation. I should add that it's not expected that every country would do every single mini manual. Probably the first step is to prioritize the top dozen or more or less policies that are of most importance in the top dozen or so targets. This is just a quick overview. I've dropped in a URL here and also a QR code, and we're ready to support in any questions you might have. Thanks for your attention and look forward to hearing from you soon on how you've applied the policy alignment manuals. Thank you.
Brilliant. So we will definitely pass on our thanks to colleague Jamie, who just had her overview presentation that provides a bit of a background to the subsequent presentations that looks at some country case studies. And as I mentioned, that if you all agree, we will take the presentations one after the other so that you also get a context of how countries are using some of these tools, but also their own approach to dealing with policy alignment and policy coherence before we open the floor for question and answer. As I mentioned, just to confirm that if you have any questions or comments on any or each of these presentations, please use the chat box and we will try and pick up the number of questions to the extent possible, only with one caution that because the presentations are recorded, we will try our best from the team here in terms of responding to some of the comments or questions, but then to ensure that it definitely will not be doing justice as the same way the presenter would do, but we'll do our best in terms of responding to your questions that are provided both in the chat box and also once we open the floor for question and answers. I don't see any question, any comment at this point. Maybe Alexis, if you are ready, we can move on to the next presentation that looks at experience from Colombia in terms of how they actually have started using the alignment and coherence approaches. And the presentation is recorded presentation from our colleague Liliana Carzo. Over to you, Alexis.
Hello to all. Now I will share insights into how we are navigating the public policy analysis process in Colombia as part of the Nature Transition Support Program. First of all, I'm going to present the agenda of what I will present to you. Let us begin our journey by addressing the methodology we applied in the analysis of policy alignment for Colombia. In the following, we will explore some of the most relevant results obtained through our analysis. And subsequently, we will dive into the recommendations and lessons learned from the use of the mini-manuals. Finally, we will review the next actions arising from our analysis. Let me detail the methodology we use to analyze policy alignment in Colombia, which comprises 5 stages. First, we conducted a review of the main drivers of biodiversity loss in the country, developing a mind map that highlights the relationships between these drivers, productive sectors, and other relevant actors. I would like to stop for a moment to show you in detail the mind map we made. As you can see, one of the drivers of biodiversity loss for Colombia is land use change. This is strongly linked to deforestation, which is one of the most relevant environmental problems in Colombia. According to Global Forest Watch, from 2002 to 2022, Colombia lost 1.92 million of hectares of primary rainforest, representing 39% of its total tree cover loss in the same time period. The middle part of the map shows how agricultural expansion and the infrastructure and mining energy sectors are strongly linked to this land use change. It is important to highlight that both the infrastructure and mining energy sectors are regulated by environmental licensing, and as such, their impacts must be adequately mitigated and compensated for. Consequently, they do have a strong state control. Conversely, the agricultural and livestock sectors operate without assessment and management of impact instruments similar to environmental licensing. Although numerous planning instruments exist, enforcement on this matter is notably lacking. Furthermore, there is a significant secondary issue, which is land grabbing and speculation, particularly prevalent in the Amazon region, where unclaimed lands are often subject to burning. Subsequently, to assert control over these areas, grass is planted and cattle are introduced, perpetuating the cycle of land appropriation and territorial dominance. This first part of the analysis was very relevant as it leads to understanding what is happening at a country level, and the results also lead us to the second stage, which is the identification of the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework that have connection to the loss of biodiversity in Colombia. We selected 7 key targets for our country. It is important to note that while all targets are relevant to Colombia, we choose those that are not only directly linked to diversity loss, but also align with the transformation needed to move towards a nature-positive economy in line with the NTSP. Progressing in our analysis, the next stage consisted of identifying public policies directly related to each of the targets. We review in detail policies, strategies, resolutions, decrees, and instruments that contribute to the fulfillment of these targets. This analysis covered not only the environmental sector, but also crucial sectors such as agriculture, mining and energy, and finance. After this initial mapping of the main policies linked to the targets, we proceed to answer the mini-manuals for each of the targets. This task took us a considerable time, but this varies from target to target and the level of detail that we wanted to achieve for each case. The last stage involved the identification of the main gaps and recommendations. For this crucial phase, a synthesis document was prepared to integrate the analysis carried out and highlight existing and necessary synergies and linkage between targets. Now, let me present some of the results of the gap analysis and specific recommendations for Colombia. In relation to Target 1, focus on plan and manage all areas to reduce biodiversity loss, we identify a significant gap in the effective application of territorial planning instruments, especially in remote areas where the state's capacity is limited. For Target 2, which seeks to restore 30% of degraded ecosystems, the main recommendation is to encourage the participation of local communities in the planning and implementation of restoration projects. It also emphasized the need for rigorous monitoring of areas undergoing restoration. Regarding Target 3, aim at conserving 30% of land, water, and seas, one of the main recommendations is to strengthen policies that ensure the connectivity and integration of protected areas systems into broader landscapes and seascapes. Target 8, related to minimize the effects of climate change on biodiversity and increase resilience, revealed the need to strengthen the link between climate change policies and biodiversity policies. Addressing Target 10, which focused on improving biodiversity and sustainability in agriculture, fisheries, and forestry, it is recommended that policies linked to transition towards sustainability be strengthened, especially in territories of conservation importance. Regarding Target 15, which promotes that business assets disclose and reduce risk and negative impacts related to biodiversity, the need for strategies or policies that link the reporting of sustainability actions was identified, especially for small and medium-sized companies. The importance of including large companies that have not yet developed this practice was also highlighted. Target 16, which refers to enabling sustainable consumption choices to reduce waste and overconsumption, highlights the need to strengthen policies of co-responsibility or extended producer responsibility and promote sustainable value chains. Finally, Target 19, which drives resource mobilization, points to the existence of financial instruments in Colombia, such as payment for ecosystem services or carbon tax. The main recommendation is to strengthen instruments that link banking and the private sector. Regarding the lessons learned, I would like to highlight 3 key features of the mini-manual's methodology. Firstly, the formulated questions allow for a structured and systematic approach to addressing each of the targets. This approach smoothly guides the identification of gaps and recommendations. Additionally, we observed that the methodology facilitates multi-scale application, meaning it can be applied at different levels, whether global, national, regional, or even local. Finally, the flexibility of the methodology stands out as it allows for adjustments based on information availability. Even in cases of information absence, the questioning process continues, ensuring that data limitations do not hinder the generation of responses to achieve the established goals. Finally, in this concluding point, I would like to talk about the next steps. First, it is relevant to emphasize that the synthesis document is being shared with the stakeholders. The goal is to consider in a participatory manner all contributions and feedback received to ensure that the document reflects the diverse perspectives of the country. This information is conceived as a useful foundation for ongoing processes and initiatives in Colombia, such as the NTSP project, the MBSAP update, and other pivotal initiatives for each goal, such as 30 by 30, the restoration strategy, among others. The aims is for this document to be a robust and collaborative tool that serves as a foundation for the progress of these key initiatives. Finally, here are some key project partners. Thank you for your attention.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Certainly, again, we'll pass on thanks to Liliana Carzo for the presentation from Colombia. And certainly, if I'm able to pick up one specific point, the focus is on alignment. But of course, towards the end of the presentations, we will certainly have a discussion on the difference of how alignment and the coherence components of it work at the national level. Please save your questions if you may have at this point. We move on to the next presentation from Ecuador, again, a country experience, a country case study presented by Ms. Maria Veronica Cardova. Alexis, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Now it is Ecuador's turn. In this presentation, I will explain a summary of the process of elaboration of the policy analysis for the alignment with the Global Biodiversity Framework that is being carried out under the Nature Transition Support Program. Here, I would like to point out that this work has been carried out together with my colleague Alfredo Lopez, an expert on national policies in Ecuador. First, I would like to explain that this process has been co-created considering the national realities, and we have divided it into 6 steps. And during the next 10 minutes, I will explain step by step. In the case of Ecuador, we began the process by analyzing the main national policies related to economic transition, considering that in recent years, it has been a priority for the country. Here, we are going to mention 2 main aspects that guided the analysis. As a starting point, the National Priorities Workshop conducted in Ecuador with national key stakeholders. And second, the analysis of existing policies, which are mainly the Strategy Towards Decarbonization and the Libro Blanco of the Circular Economy of Ecuador. The main mandates were extracted from each document, and we did an analysis of their relation with each of the GBF targets. This first analysis led to the selection of the targets to be analyzed, which were number 1, target 2, 3, 5, 9, 10, 15, and 16 as the most relevant. Next, for each target selected, we made a quick mapping of national policies that contribute to the target. In this case, we considered laws, regulation, sectoral plans, national strategies, and other legal documents. And now, with all these inputs, we began the elaboration of each of the sections of the mini manuals, which was a very revealing and interesting work, considering that in each target, different aspects or national realities should be taken into consideration, such as the natural, social, and political situation of the country. This was a bit of a challenge, but very important to take into account to see the real situation and trends of the country. In this step, a horizontal reading was made, which led us to take a step back after reviewing all the mini-manuals, since in reality, there are targets that will contribute to each other. This analysis led to the identification of economic pathways, which was one of the objectives of the study. I will now present the main gaps and recommendations for each of the selected targets. Target 1. The broad framework of national policies has a high degree of coherence with Target 1. However, the integration of the process, instruments, and results of land planning developed by indigenous people and local communities into the formal cycle of planning and design of public policies still represents a challenge for the country. Another challenge is the effective application of land use and land use change policies and regulations, including aquatic, marine, and coastal areas at different levels of government, which is aggravated by the substantial reduction of their budget and technical capacity of effective applied public policies. Target 2. For this analysis of the target, it is important to mention that according to official data from the Ministry of Environment, Water, and Ecologic Transition, gross deforestation for the period of 2008 to 2014 was 47,497 hectares per year, while for the period of 2014 to 2016, it was 61,112 hectares. As for the main cause of land use change leading to degradation, it can be mentioned that the agricultural sector accounted for 40% of the country's total GDP in the first quarter of 2023. Historically, Ecuadorian government has invested resources in the sector. However, the reduction of public investment has led to a decrease in the capacity to provide technical assistance to small producers, and with it, the possibility of implementing and monitoring agricultural practices that could favor restoration process at the national level. In conclusion, restoring 30% of the country's degraded area is still uncertain, despite having a strengthened regulatory framework in the area, and this is even more affected by the economic and social crisis the country is going through. Target 3. For this target, it is important to recognize the national efforts to expand the areas under conservation in Ecuador. In recent years has increased its surface to a total of 26.24 million hectares under the national system of protected areas, including marine and terrestrial areas, which gives a total of 19.45% of the national territory. In addition, it maintains other conservation efforts, such as protected forest, water protection areas, biological corridors, among others. However, it is recommended to direct urgent actions to ecosystems with greater threats in the country, in addition to strengthen the capacity of government and enforce its role of coordination, supervision, monitoring, and control, both in the terrestrial and the marine areas. The issue of land tenure is also an important point to clarify and should be discussed with local communities and indigenous people. The financial situation, the evaluation of management effectiveness, and governance models are also important points for urgent action in order to align with target. Target 5. Policies to promote the legal, safe, and sustainable use, collection, and trade of wildlife are advances at a slow pace. There are several factors that contribute to this trend. First, the lacking knowledge oriented to the management of a large stock of species with potential commerce interests. Second, a large sector of consumers with low level of recognition of the effort to produce a safe, legal, and sustainable product. The scarce supply of financing impact investments aimed to micro and small associative ventures, among others. In short, there are several structural factors that prevent a real transition to sustainable production, distribution, and consumption systems. Addressing this challenge requires Ecuador to take action that goes beyond what we can achieve through the implementation of good practices for the use or collection of wild species. Thus, in general terms, the coherence of national policies to achieve Target 5 still shows an important gap that needs to be closed. Target 9. There is a weak linkage between public and private policies, programs, and budgets aimed at developing sustainable bio-based initiatives, as well as a lack of political and strategic direction from government authorities. In this context, there is a clear weak connection between the research agendas of universities and public institutes and the demands of the productive sector. Target 10. A relevant factor that positively influences trends towards sustainable production is associated with consumer preferences in international markets, and in particular the regulations established in the trade agreements signed by Ecuador with the European Union, the United States and China, and other regulations imposed in emerging markets in Asia and Europe. Of course, the domestic market also offers a window of opportunity. However, the size of Ecuador's market is extremely small. As recommendations, Ecuador should strengthen its regulatory framework within the productive sectors, and in parallel, support those vulnerable sectors that have a high impact on nature and biodiversity. Additionally, promote innovation agendas for developing markets. Target 15. It is essential to advance in the structuring and full implementation of the National Environmental Management System, which is the main mechanism that will allow the articulation of government environmental agencies with society and social and community organizations through management norms and instruments. Target 16. In the context of a country with an economy in recession, in which poverty and extreme poverty indicators have raised, with little or no public investment, it is complicated to speak of reducing consumption as a national target. Perhaps it is possible in certain segments of the population. Policies must be improved, companies must be encouraged to implement practices for a circular economy, and innovation needs in the industrial sector must be coordinated with the academia. All of this accompanied by a massive education campaign. As lessons learned from this process, I would like to highlight the following. The study should begin by defining the level of detail of the analysis and the desired scope. Then consider that the process of elaborating these mini-manuals is multi-stakeholder and multi-level. Finally, recognize that this is a continuous iterative process that can always be improved. As for next steps in Ecuador, we have socializing the first results of the analysis with key stakeholders, including their feedback and adjusting the text, and making recommendations to achieve real and enforceable policy coherence. Finally, identifying synergies with related projects. The main objective is that this input will serve the MPSAP update process, which we are coordinating directly with our EAS colleagues in the territory. Finally, here are some of our partners for the collaboration of the policy coherent analysis. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks to a colleague from Ecuador who just made her presentation. We are slightly running behind schedule with the number of presentations we still have. And if you agree, what I would suggest is that we will hear to the presentation from Uzbekistan, another country experience. And after Uzbekistan's presentation, maybe I'll open the floor for any quick question, no more than 2 to 3 questions or comments before we proceed to a set of 3 more presentations after that before we open the floor for overall question and answers. Alexis, you can project the presentation, a pre-recorded presentation from Uzbekistan. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Josh Brand. I'm leading the work under Component 3 of the Early Action Support Project in Uzbekistan. Thanks to Alexis and the global team for inviting us to share some of the experiences from Uzbekistan in the webinar today. So I'm just going to briefly talk about how we approach the review, then highlight some of the key findings and recommendations that we ended with, and then also talk a little bit about some of the examples in Uzbekistan, how the country is taking an multi-sectoral approach to some national policies that have relevance for biodiversity. In the review, we had to think about how to turn this into a useful output. So how to structure the review, what kind of framework to use, and we have 4 dimensions. We have the GBF-23 GBF targets themselves. We have the content and focus of the relevant national legislation and policies. We have the review questions that we're trying to answer. And then the 4th dimension that's also important is time, which relates to the implementation of national policies and laws in the past, present, and future. So in terms of the scope and sources of the review, we tried to focus on certain aspects of the Global Biodiversity Framework targets that had particular relevance for Uzbekistan. So again, based on guidance from the global team, for example, Uzbekistan is one of the world's 2 double landlocked countries. The aspects of the targets related to marine and coastal aspects were a little bit less relevant in the context of Uzbekistan. So when you think about biodiversity policy coherence, obviously the MBSAP is one key policy, but that's being primarily reviewed under component 1 of the project. So that was not the main focus of the work that we did, although we are coordinating closely with the work being done under component 1 of the Early Action Support Project. So the main focus of the review under component 3 was on legislation and policies from other sectors that do have relevance for biodiversity, from agriculture, water management, land use, forestry, fisheries, etc. And so we conducted a desk review, researching different laws and policies. There is a legal research portal for Uzbekistan, which was very helpful. And we were fortunate to have a few other really helpful sources of other reports and things that had been done in Uzbekistan. For example, the UNECE Environmental Performance Review that was done in 2020, information from other projects, and including the biofin project. Uzbekistan is one of the countries participating in the UNDP biofin program, and they had produced some publications recently. So based on the desk review, we came up with around 1,000 potential different national policies and legislation and regulations. We tried to really focus on the most relevant ones, but still pretty too large of a number to really analyze comprehensively. So we had to really focus on key policies and supporting legislation and regulations that had direct relevance to specific targets. So again, drawing on guidance from the global team, we took the target first approach, which is to say, looking at a target and then identifying potential relevant legislation and policies from across different sectors, rather than looking at a particular sector first and then trying to match it to targets. So we found that to be a useful approach. Another key aspect was identifying specific policy outcomes that would be relevant for each target. So we had to kind of develop those and think about them on our own, but based on guidance from the global project in the mini manuals, we tried to identify how different national policies would relate to specific GBF targets. So then we also brought in the GBF Global Indicators Framework and found that was helpful, again, to really specifically identify key results associated with each GBF target and how national policies and legislation might be supportive or linked with those key results. So to conduct the review, we used a basic review matrix. Again, starting with each target, looking at the summary, specific policy outcomes that we might want to see, linking again to the GBF indicators, brief analysis, and then identifying specific key policies and laws that would be relevant, and again, potential recommendations associated with aligning national policies and laws with the specific GBF target. And then in the review itself, the report, we used this table to summarize that information and then have a brief analysis on the national policies and laws for each particular target. Identified anywhere between 0 and 4 recommendations per target. Altogether, we ended up with around 1 to 3 pages of analysis per GBF target. So moving on to some of the key findings. For a variety of reasons, there has been a lot of development, rapid development in national legislation and policy framework in Uzbekistan in recent years. And generally speaking, that has been favorable for biodiversity. There have been there's been increasing alignment with global good practices on integrating biodiversity into some of the national policies and laws. But there's definitely a lot of opportunities for strengthening that still, particularly on some key cross-cutting issues such as strengthening the national biodiversity monitoring framework. There's still a lack of a comprehensive environmental code, and a few other key areas and gaps that were identified in the review. Altogether, we ended with more than 40 potential recommendations for strengthening national policy and legal framework. It sounds like a lot, but when you think about there being 23 GBF targets, that's a little under an average of a little under 2 recommendations per target. So potentially not too bad. And that included 4 general recommendations related to, again, strengthening biodiversity monitoring and research, some different aspects that had cross-cutting relevance for multiple targets. So now I'm just going to touch on some examples from the country on multi-sectoral approaches. So for example, the key one is the Uzbekistan Strategy 2030, which was just adopted last year, actually. And this is the national development strategy. It takes a multi-sectoral approach and has multiple national goals and indicators in one high-level national policy document, including multiple goals and indicators relevant for biodiversity. So it's a really interesting and positive approach. You can see here just the brief overview of the structure of the Strategy 2030. It has 5 pillars, with the third one being the important and relevant one in the context of environmental conservation and biodiversity. And so I'm highlighting here just a couple of examples from the key goals from the Strategy 2030. For example, a goal with an indicator related to urban planning, but that includes a target on including at least 30% of green areas in urban areas and urban plans. There's also indicators on protected areas. You can see here the specific target is actually not fully aligned with the GBF yet, but there's already work going on to improve that alignment there. So again, a lot of interesting ways that there are one national policy document, a national development strategy that takes a multi-sectoral approach and mainstreams biodiversity in that. Another positive example is the strategy for transition of the Republic of Uzbekistan to a green economy in the period of 2019 to 2030. It's another multi-sectoral national policy document with relevance for biodiversity. It includes targets and specific results, for example, in the field of forestry, on reforesting forest zones in the country, and restoration of degraded lands. So in the context of agriculture, so again, multi-sectoral approaches that have important relevance for biodiversity and to the GBF targets. And then finally, concept of environmental protection in Uzbekistan to 2030, another high-level national policy document, which includes multiple targets and goals specifically related to biodiversity, including expansion of the protected area system, support for rational use of natural resources, other key aspects that do have linkages to the GBF targets. So again, another multi-sectoral national policy that is very interesting approach. So thank you very much for your attention. I know I went through that very quickly, but I'm happy to have follow-up questions or communication by email after the webinar. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks to our colleague from Uzbekistan, Josh Brown, who made the presentation. As I mentioned in the meeting chat, which I'm sure you can access or see, is that we don't want this to be a series of presentations. So I'd like to sort of have a short break by taking 2 questions, if you may have, on the presentations made so far, before we move to 2 presentations which will conclude the list of presenters. If you have a question, please do put it in the chat box or raise your hand. We'll be able to take 2 questions or 2 comments at this time before we move on to the next presentation. Yes, there was a question email of colleague from Uzbekistan. Yes, certainly. All the presentations are being shared, and you can definitely get the mail ID of the colleague from Uzbekistan from that presentation. Good. Yes, it's already provided. Any other question, comment at this time? And I'm just sort of trying to see if there are any colleagues online who have raised their hands to speak rather than type in the chat box. All right. Yeah, question for Uzbekistan. In your review, looking at particularly target 1, did you come up for recommendations for participatory integrated planning? So certainly a question which will definitely get feedback, but from my own reading of the presentation that was made, yes, looks like they did have had it, even though it was sort of really not, really emphasized, but certainly to me, hearing the presentation, they did look at the participatory planning as a part of that exercise. But of course, colleague Josh will be more suited to answer that question. We'll pass on the question to Josh, if you can provide your contact to our colleagues online. Good. So since there are no, okay, there is another question, and this probably will be the last question we will take. Do you see specific tool for policy coherence? Yes, I did answer that question. We will. Please wait to hear from our colleague Patrick Chesney, who will speak about that. And also I will provide some brief remarks from UNAP side, exactly focusing on tools for policy coherence after we get to 2 other presentations before we close. Okay, now we are, okay. Question for Ecuador. What's the question? Okay. Fine, we have noted that. We will definitely respond or send your questions to both Ecuador and Uzbekistan for that. We will now move to the next presentation, which will be made by a colleague from UNDP, Scott Atkinson, who will be speaking about spatial data and its role and use on issues of policy alignment and coherence. So over to you, Scott.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me just fine?
Perfect. Go ahead.
Perfect. Well, good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of you. I don't know where all of you are coming from around the world. My name is Scott Atkinson, and I'm a technical specialist and spatial planner with the UNDP, and I'm joining you today from Tasmania in Australia. So it's getting into evening time for me here. It's a pleasure to be there with all of you, even if remotely. And then the next 5 to 8 minutes or so, I'm going to do my best to introduce spatial dossiers on, dossiers on spatial data and using spatial data to help support policy alignment. So what is this product? Essentially, UNDP has created an early prototype of a national spatial dossier for policy alignment. And these dossiers feature a portfolio of up to 23 national maps created using global spatial data sets for prioritization of nature-based actions for policy alignment. Parties can help use these maps to identify areas for further evaluation towards implementing nature-based strategies in support of the achievement of targets of the GBF and related MEAs, And there's two things I'd like to highlight. First is we recognize that many countries will have better quality national data. And this is an early attempt to start thinking about these questions to support each country in their own national level efforts. And secondly, as this is still a very early stage project, we have not yet comprehensively included data recommended by the monitoring framework of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and future iterations of this dossier will begin to align more with that monitoring framework in its next iterations. So these dossiers themselves are organized around 10 key themes, which you should see on this slide. Sorry, my internet was going a bit slow there, so I couldn't tell if you were looking at that or not. For each theme, we provide a preliminary policy alignment analysis showing relevant targets from the GBF, as well as from the Agenda 2030, the Paris Agreement, and the Sendai framework. We then provide national maps for each theme that can support countries to begin thinking about where nature-based actions could support commitments across these various MEAs. And where available, the input layers used for the maps can be accessed on the UN Biodiversity Lab if you have not visited that and made use of that tool yet. In addition, the maps produced within these dossiers are fully available for republishing and for use, unless specifically noted otherwise. Okay, so we're going to explore what this looks like for one of the 10 themes. Particularly, we're looking at the theme of ecosystem integrity and conservation. Here, you're going to see an initial analysis of relevant GBF targets and related targets from other MEAs. These include GBF targets 1 and 3, as well as SDG targets 15.1, 15.2, and 15.3. On the next few slides, we're going to show these related maps. For ecosystem integrity and conservation, we offer 4 maps customized to your country. And also a quick little note in the example slides that you're just about to see, we show several different countries. But just rest assured that the dossiers made for a particular country will only include maps relevant to you. So if you're from Uzbekistan, maps in your dossier will only show things relevant to Uzbekistan. Okay, in our first example, we're showing a map of ecological intactness using the example of Brazil, which is the most biodiverse country on the planet. The Ecological Intactness Index, or EII, which is shown here, which was first published in 2020 by Bayer et al., published by Bayer et al. It's a metric that captures habitat loss, habitat quality, and habitat fragmentation effects. It can be calculated from any data layer that represents a continuous measure of habitat quality. Things such as the Human Modification Index from Theobald et al. In 2020, or the Human Industrial Footprint from Venter et al., first published in 2016. One note about these dossiers is we are presenting them using the Human Industrial Footprint from Venter et al. But if you have a national data set that would be a good substitute for this, it's easily replaceable to calculate that EII index using it instead. Our second example shows the second most biodiverse country on the planet, Indonesia, and the representation of its terrestrial ecosystems within the protected area state as it relates to the 30% effective conservation target specified in Target 3 of the GBF. So this map can help your country to identify if there is a gap between the current coverage of each ecosystem and that 30% target. So in this map, we are using the World Terrestrial Ecosystem data from Sayert et al. In 2020, who used a unique approach to identify global ecosystems, and the World Database on Protected Areas and the World Database on Other Effective Area-Based Conservation Measures. These are the WDPA or the WDOECM for those who are familiar with them. One note about this, in these dossiers we've produced, we are using the October 2023 version of the WDPA. So here we are in March 2024. There are continuous updates to that monthly, so that's just something to be aware of. In our next example, we show the threatened status of ecosystems in Kyrgyzstan by mapping how intact each ecosystem is. To do this, we calculate the intactness of an ecosystem as the percentage of each world terrestrial ecosystem that has an ecological intactness value lower than the median ecological intactness value in the country. So we class these areas as not intact. Accordingly, the higher percentage of these non-intact areas there are within an ecosystem, the lower its overall level of intactness is. And we consider these ecosystems to then be threatened, more threatened. We use the World Terrestrial Ecosystems data and the Ecological Intactness Index data that were shown in previous 2 slides to calculate this. But this can be done again using any terrestrial ecosystem data you may have at national level, as well as a recalculated ecological intactness index using national data. And in the last example we're going to show, we show the protected area states and the OECMs. So these are the other effective area-based conservation measures in Morocco. While proposed PAs and OECMs are not included in official indices calculations, we do show them in these dossiers for informational purposes. And that's it for the ecosystem integrity and conservation theme. Each theme will have a similar set of aligned policy targets and relevant maps to support national efforts for planning around these targets. But before I wrap up, I just wanted to highlight some key differences between the different spatial data products that you have access to or will have access to through the EAS project. The document and dossiers I've shown here today, as well as the other spatial products shared through Component 3, draw on validated scientific research around spatial planning and prioritization to support nature-based actions for policy alignment. They use best-in-class global data sets for spatial planning for policy coherence, but are not yet comprehensively aligned to the data recommended in the monitoring framework. And the documents we will be releasing in the coming months for Component 2 that you can see here are comprehensively aligned with the GBF monitoring framework and the ongoing work of the ad hoc technical expert group working on indicators. And in the future, we're working to bring these products together to provide comprehensive advice for using spatial data for planning, monitoring, and reporting to the GEF. So many thanks for your attention, and I'll turn it back over to our facilitator. And I'm here live today, so if there's any questions, we can ask them and answer them in real time. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Scott. Thank you very much. We really are running behind schedule. It's a challenge when you have recorded presentations because we can't actually present. We have to patiently listen to the recording. So certainly we will go to the presentation on the checklist for policy coherence. I saw a question in the chat box related to this on tools for policy coherence. I'm sure Patrick will cover elements of that in his presentation. Just to alert you, we are having difficulties reaching out to our colleague from Vanuatu because of the internet connectivity there. So we hope that colleague can join, but if not, Patrick's presentation will be the last presentation before we open the floor for questions and comments. So please be a little patient, bear with us as we quickly complete the last presentation for today. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Balakrishna, for your warm words of introduction. This presentation is on the checklist of key policies related to elements of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Next slide. The foundation for this work is in decisions 15.4 on the framework itself, and decision 15.17 on the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity within and across sectors. And the idea here, of course, is to promote coherence between the CBD and other biodiversity-related conventions. On slide 3, as many of you know, this component 3 focuses on actions for policy coherence in nature-related sectors. So UNEP has prepared this checklist of key policies, as well as options for policy coherence to assist parties to meet their obligations on the decision 15.4. Now on slide 4, we refer to a definition for policy coherence from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which defines policy coherence for development as an approach to integrate the dimensions of sustainable development throughout domestic and international policy making. And there's some other elements to that definition. But I also wanted to remind us of something said by our facilitator, Balakrishna, earlier, of UNEP being the custodian of Sustainable Development Goal 17, which outlines target 17.14 on policy coherence and defines it as the coherence between policies in general that cover the dimensions of sustainable development. Now we're going to go into, on the next slide, we're going to go into now the actual checklist, highlighting the structure. Highlighting the structure and what it's all about. Now, there are these building blocks which we refer to, and these are the actual elements that are within Decision 15.4, such as the revised and updated NBSAPs and non-state actor commitments. And then these, there are elements of the GBF such as political will and integrated approaches, and then the checklist itself, a series of questions that help us to unpack that the building blocks and the elements. On the next slide is an actual example of key questions related to political will and 2 elements needed for the successful implementation of the framework, including the revision and updating of NBSAPs and the preparation of national reports. Now, let's take political will as a relevant building block. We look at the element of the GBF, such as revised and updated national biodiversity strategy and action plan. And some key questions here we suggest are, is there political will and recognition at the highest level of government for the GBF in your country? And second question is, have focal points of the Rio Conventions, biodiversity-related conventions, and the Sustainable Development Goals and representatives of line ministries and sectors in your country adopted a roadmap for alignment and coordinated action? So key questions in the checklist related to the elements, the element of revised and updated NBSAPs for the building block, political will. On the next slide, mindful of time running from us, we look at the relevant building block of integrated approaches and the element of revised and updated national biodiversity strategies and action plan. And in the checklist, you'll find these helpful questions. Is your country taking policy measures to encourage integrated planning and management for sustainability at the landscape and seascape levels? And another question, is there implementation of cross-sectoral approaches that consider linkages and interconnections between sectoral policies and actions in your country? In terms of a second element, information on non-state actor commitments towards the framework as applicable, a key question is, what legal, administrative, or policy measures are in place in your country to encourage businesses to provide information to consumers to promote sustainable consumption patterns? How effective have these been, and how could their effectiveness be improved? On slide 8, ladies and gentlemen, the slide on options for policy coherence. So sorry. The slide on options for policy coherence provides examples of actions related to the process to update NBSAPs, setting up new national targets, developing implementation plans, and dealing with financing and applying the whole of government approach. And the example of the actions, for example, in setting new national targets, target setting based on integrated approaches, using existing policies, example in agriculture and financing. And on slide 9, finally, ladies and gentlemen, the checklist offers 6 key recommendations to help parties align national policies with international commitments, facilitate international cooperation, address complex challenges, optimize resource allocation, strengthen compliance, and engages stakeholders meaningfully and effectively. We close by reminding on the last slide, reminding us all that policy coherence contributes to more sustainable and effective environmental protection efforts globally. So thank you so much. This presentation will be made available, and as you know, this checklist is also listed in a technical support booklet for which the link was provided in the chat by our colleague Anthony. Balakrishna, back to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for that presentation. As Patrick mentioned, that the checklist, the presentation, both are available on the chat box. Thanks to Anthony for providing the links. And in case if you can't access it, let us know. I just would like to check if our colleague from Vanuatu is online, just to confirm that we don't miss him. Erickson, are you online? Okay, looks like perhaps he's unable to join. So that actually brings us to the end of a series of presentations for today's webinar. I just will take 2 minutes to give a quick link to the discussions related to alignment and coherence before I open the floor for questions and comments. But of course, for those of you who remember the first presentation by Jamie, she did mention that the policy alignment is a subset of discussions related to policy coherence. Policy coherence is broader, and it's, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, emanated from our discussions related to the Sustainable Development Goal 17, Target 14, using Indicator 1. But of course, the number of examples provided at the country level, the case studies that have been discussed, certainly are extremely valuable and useful as countries prepare to update their biodiversity strategies and action plans, looking at the alignment parts of it. But of course, the coherence part of it, it's a little broader discussion. For example, looking at the links to trade policies, links to the sustainable development policies, links to the other action plans and strategies, such as the national adaptation plans, and all those kinds of things. And from UNEP, we actually have been working on the issue of policy coherence, as I mentioned, in the context of Sustainable Development Goals. But thanks to the GF project as supporting countries for updating their NBSAPs, we now have scaled up the discussions to include the multilateral environmental agreements, including the Convention on Biological Diversity. A number of tools are available, and certainly we will provide you some of those details in terms of the tools for policy coherence. But most importantly, just to remind you, in case if you were a little confused listening to the presentation from Jamie and Patrick, because you have heard 2 definitions. What Jamie mentioned or presented was a definition that was adopted by the Global Environment Facilities Scientific Technical Advisory Panel, whereas the present definition provided by Patrick is the one that has been discussed by the OECD and also by UNEP. So it indicates, as of now, we do not have one definition related to policy coherence. So certainly there are a few, but it's in the context of our discussions on NBSAPs, we would actually combine the definitions of both the GEF STAP and also the Global Environment Facilities one. Lastly, and importantly, the discussions on policy coherence in the context of NBSAPs is so very valuable because one of the big gaps, as you know, we have found in terms of reporting related to SDGs, whether it is SDG 13 or 14 or 15, as you know, related to some of the elements of the discussions on biodiversity, is the lack of information coming from the sectoral components into the presentations or into the reporting that happens on SDGs. So certainly this is a great and an opportune moment for countries to consider some of these issues as the NBSAPs are being updated and the national targets and indicators are being set. so that the same information can be picked up by colleagues working on the sustainable development goals, colleagues working on SDG 13, or those working on the disaster risk reduction elements of it, as mentioned by Scott and others, so that the same information can be picked up and we can actually maximize the use of that data and information. Just a few elements in terms of some clarification. The floor is open for questions and comments. Sorry, we have run a little behind schedule, and please feel free to raise your hand or put your question on the chat box so that we will be able to take a few questions before we close this particular session. The floor is open for questions, comments, or inputs, colleagues. Okay, are there any questions, comments? I don't see any on the chat box as of now. I'm carefully monitoring the chat box from my side, but in case if you want to speak up, please disable your, unmute yourself and take the floor and speak. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. I'm just checking the participants just to confirm I don't miss anyone asking for the floor. Looks like none. Okay, if that be the case, certainly thanks a lot, colleagues. Again, the mail IDs are provided on all the presentations, but also the presentations made by Scott and Patrick. So please do, yes, of course. Thanks a lot, Alexis. The mail IDs are there on the screen. So if you have any questions, if you have any additional comments, or if you want to get some clarifications, please do reach out to colleagues who were a part of this particular engagement. Thanks a lot for your interest. Thanks a lot for your time. And most importantly, I'd like to thank our colleagues from UNDP who did a brilliant job of pulling this entire thing together, especially Alexis for all your support, and to Anthony from UNDP for being there and helping us with all the links that were presented in the chat box. So colleagues, have a great day, have a great evening, great afternoon, and certainly we look forward to engaging with you as we move forward. And what we will do is, thanks Anthony for the reminder, we will ask Vanuatu to share their presentation, and certainly that will be made available through the online portal and also through the link that Alexis has provided. But also, colleagues, remember, we have the NBSAP forum, the second version of the NBSAP forum, where all of these presentations will be made available. Please do look up to the NBSAP forum. And lastly, before I close, there is a survey that will be provided. So please, spare a few minutes to provide your inputs so that our future designing of these webinars could be done in a better and an effective way. So I just sort of wanted to finally confirm that there are no questions. So thanks a lot, colleagues. Have a great day and enjoy your days. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Bella.